The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around. What do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters. The very minds of the people we are trying to save. Until we do, these people are still part of that system. That makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Are you listening to me, Leo? Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening?
Personally, I'm a bit obsessive about the pursuit of not being wrong, which is very different than the pursuit of truth. I find that reality is unknowable, and each individual has their own truth. My work is about the bigger societal picture of what builds a safe and free community. I discovered that understanding policing was really about understanding crime, and understanding crime was really about understanding human behavior. From this path, I have made claims that I wish to be held to the strongest levels of debate and scrutiny. Anyone willing to publicly debate anything I have stated, please reach out and do it. There is no need to write cowardly articles or play gossip girls on social media. I'm right here. Anything about policing, gun control, violence, crime, race, mass organizations, media, and such, email info@imembermedia.com. And someone will respond to arrange a discussion to be posted right here on the Nuance podcast and video broadcast. Here are some of the arguments I make that supposedly have many willing to debate but never seem to show up. Not a single police department is fighting the things that cause crime. All violence is a biological malfunction. There are 4 outstanding correlates to violence and crime. In order of prominence, they are environmental toxins, resource inequality, local instability, and the use of state-sanctioned violence. The Second Amendment prevents the superior right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Second Amendment is the recipe of police killings. That means killing cops and killer cops. The difference between gender and sex is simple, and there are limitless genders. There is no such thing as being transgender. I have found that the history of American policing has a foundation of 3 pillars which continue to define the fundamental functions of policing in the United States. They are the first and primary pillar of American policing, the creation and maintenance of oppressed classes from which resources are extracted to institute continued oppression. Second is the valuing of superior class property over the lives of oppressed classes. And third, the continued genocide of the indigenous nations of North America. All media pundits are phony intellectuals and will only debate the ignorant or other media pundits who are in on the game. It is impossible for the current structures to fix policing to serving the people. The police must be restructured to take orders from the community, not institutional power systems. There is no free will. And I'm sure there are plenty more if you choose to look. So if any of these or any of those strike you or are something you want to argue, then do not just sit there. If you think your favorite pundit will destroy me in a debate, then do not tell me. I don't give a damn. Petition them to further the discussion. I will always be respectful. I will not insult. But I will do the most offensive thing that you can do to another person. I will treat you like an equal. Email info@imembermedia.com or go to the website imembermedia.com. Reach out. And welcome to part 2 of the Humanist versus Environmentalist debate between Patrick Farnsworth and me. In this episode, we discuss what is good for humanity and human beings. even though they sound different. They are kind of the same thing. I mean, even though they sound the same, they are different. And we'll get into that. As an introduction, I felt a bit of surprise when I saw the environmentalist in this debate, Patrick Farnsworth, release this video that I'm about to play for you. For some reason, I keep holding out hope that people will be able to quickly think about things and reorientate their thinking. Now, I do not know why I do that, as the science is clear that most people take quite a while to make such changes, if they ever change. As a species, we're so comfortable with what is familiar that we prefer to harm ourselves or continue being harmed than to face the unfamiliar. The appeal to authority of the so-called climate scientists made perfect sense to me until I was a scientist. That is, and I began to apply my understanding of research to their literature and studies. Now, this is never to say that we should not care about the environment. It's that these terms of subjectivity must include a comparison. All right, for example, care for who? Protect for who? Healthy for who? These are not original thoughts of mine. The science of constructivism theory explains this for those interested, and my dissertation is based on constructivism theory involving Kant, Piaget, Rawls, and Korsgaard. If you not know any of those names, it's probably a good sign that you should withhold opinions on the subject. And I do not believe that Patrick will be friendly with me anymore, and I'm never here for the person I'm talking to. It's always for you, or for their audience. So let us just be forthright about this. And this is a side topic, but I struggle with. I do mask a lot of what my guests and people who have interacted with me have said and done in the interest of trying to get along. And it feels dirty to me. In this video, Patrick is demonstrating a textbook backfire effect. We have discussed the backfire effect before, but there is a podcast series that I encourage you to listen to called You Are Not So Smart. YourNotSoSmart.com. It has some episodes on the backfire effect that are very well done. But essentially, since I was focusing on the lack of data and inconsistencies of environmentalism in climate science, and Patrick is embarrassed subconsciously. So his instinct will be to double down that there is data and it is not inconsistent, that the messenger must be a bigot, charlatan, or a liar. We tend to look at the death of Galileo with surprise. How could they do that? How could they treat him like that? How could they deny the science? Well, it's quite predictable, really. Too much truth at once is so unfamiliar that people will often actively fight it. I'm just trying to say simple things in comparison to changing your entire, the things I'm saying are simple in comparison to changing your entire worldview, as Galileo was trying to, or at least just reporting. I shouldn't have to state this, but obviously I was not using the Reid technique, as Patrick accuses me. Whenever I'm accused of something, it is always in this cowardly behind my back manner that coincides with a refusal to hash out the issues on the record. Anyway, I have been a vocal opponent to the Reid interviewing technique, which is a deceitful interrogation technique that attempts to elicit information from people suspected of lying about committing a crime. If you haven't seen Making a Murderer, the way that Brandon Dassey is treated is kind of textbook Reid, or not textbook, it's a stupid word to say, typical or common way that the Reid technique is carried out in an investigative way, which I mean, these things are not for the thinking person, so you can't claim to be a thinking person and claim to be a victim of the Reid technique. But anyway, so what it does is it tends to try and get people to admit they did something that they didn't do, or at least that's a common side effect. They admit something they didn't do is what they're trying, because they just play these scenarios out where you try to provide a pathway out, and then the pathway out is a setup. But anyway, that's a bit of a different subject. Maybe we'll do that one day. So obviously, I mean, this is an interviewing technique about a crime. I don't even understand how that correlates to a discussion about environmentalism and Skype or over Skype. But the trick is that when presented with the allegation that I used this technique, it fit the preconceived notions that allowed Patrick to escape the pain of learning and evolving. For the record, I've never used the Reid technique on criminal suspects. I mean, not only have I did not use the Reid technique here, I've never used the Reid technique even on criminal suspects. I shouldn't say even criminal suspects. I'm kind of hesitating and trying to find the words. On suspects in Baltimore, people who were suspected of a crime, because it was junk science then, and it's junk science now. That Patrick would lean on more junk science to support his junk science should not surprise. So Patrick would place himself as the innocent person being interrogated to elicit a false confession of a crime. So we know then how Patrick sees himself, which is, or at least is reporting to, is with a childlike innocence, and sees the idea of not being an environmentalist as criminal. So now Patrick is an oppressed victim and is being oppressed by a less than human criminal and deceiver whose power is so great that he is helpless. Everyone, please understand. I'm not that powerful. My voice carried digitally over hundreds, if not thousands of miles away does not have this ability. But you do. It is you who can imagine that this is true, but it is not. I'm not that smart. I do not have some master plan. I have two prominent skills that anyone can. First and foremost, a dedicated effort to eliminate my biases. And second, a relentless application of critical thinking. If you think those are admirable traits, try talking to my wife. She'll try to change your mind. Patrick points out that the sixth step of the Reid technique, like it means something, though it is completely uncorrelated to the situation at hand. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to read you the full 9 steps, and you can see how that applies to the discussion at hand. Then I will play Patrick's video and go into the episode. 1. Direct confrontation. Advise the suspect that the evidence has led the police to the individual as a suspect. Offer the person an early opportunity to explain why the offense took place. 2. Try to shift the blame away from the suspect to some other person or set of circumstances that prompted the suspect to commit the crime. That is, develop themes containing reasons that will psychologically justify or excuse the crime. Themes may be developed or changed to find one which the accused is most responsive. 3. Try to minimize the frequency of suspect denials. 4. At this point, the accused will often give a reason why he or she did not or could not commit the crime. Try to use this to move towards the acknowledgement of what they did. 5. Reinforce sincerity to ensure that the suspect is receptive. 6. The suspect will become quieter and listen. Move the theme of the discussion towards offering alternatives. The suspect cries at this point. Infer guilt. 7. Pose the alternative question, given 2 choices for what happened, one more socially acceptable than the other. The suspect is expected to choose the easier option, but whichever alternate the suspect chooses, guilt is admitted. As stated above, there is always a third option, which is to maintain that they did not commit the crime. 8. Lead the suspect to repeat the admission of guilt in front of witnesses and develop corroborating information to establish the validity of the confession. 9. Document the suspect's admission or confession, have him or her prepare a recorded statement, audio, video, or written.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning. Expression. Or sound.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference
Nuance.
in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A subtle
or
difference
sound.
in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A
or
subtle
sound.
difference in or shade of meaning,
Noun.
expression, or sound.
Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning, expression, or sound.
Before you jump into this 2-hour video, I just wanted to provide a bit of context, at least give myself a chance to explain what I got out of this thing. So this is a debate, and I would use quotation marks around debate to describe what this is. This was, after it was all said and done, an incredibly frustrating experience, which, again, after it was done, I felt like, was there anything that actually came out of this that was useful to anybody? And I can almost say that there's practically nothing about this that is going to be of benefit. It didn't further the conversation. There was no real, there was nothing really that came out of it except deep frustration and almost a sense of like, not that I was used exactly or anything like that, but the sort of feeling of like, it's kind of dirty. Like, again, this wasn't a debate. While it was supposed to be one, while it was framed as a debate when we were setting this up, the way that the whole thing played out was just, and you're going to understand once you start this thing. So it initially started out as a conversation that was meant to discuss human nature, human beings and their relationship with the natural world, what is nature, and what is the difference between how human beings engage with the, quote, natural world and how other living beings engage with that as well. My contention is that there are significant differences in how human systems choose to engage with resources, with ecosystems, with the climate system, versus other beings that exist on this planet that are nowhere near as burdensome on the living systems of this planet as human beings and human societies tend to be, at least at this time, and within this particular context of the society that we are in right now. So what really started this thing was I posted an article on Facebook. It was from Scientific American, if I believe that's correct. It was basically an article that was discussing how the border wall, or I should say the barriers that have been built along the southern U.S. border, have been a nightmare, a catastrophe for ecosystems in that region. It impairs many different animals' ability to migrate, to breed, to even survive. And when we talk about the border wall, immigration, we tend to focus almost exclusively on the humanitarian crisis that has emerged out of that, which is definitely worth our attention, and it's not something that I'm trying to gloss over by any means. But we often forget the non-human life that is impacted by these policy decisions by the U.S. government to build these barriers along the southern border. What started from there was me basically posting this article and Michael commenting, saying that this is conjecture, this is opinion, this isn't true. And I said that's not true. There's plenty of science to indicate that this in fact is a problem and we should care about this. That quickly escalated to becoming something like an argument about whether we should give a shit about other living beings, whether it matters to human beings, whether or not barriers along any border, an arbitrary border, whether we should give a shit about other life as a result of that, as long as human beings are okay. And my whole point was that actually the fact that we think that we can separate ourselves from the natural world, from other living beings on this planet, may in fact lead us towards our own extinction, which is a big statement to make. But when you fit it within the context of abrupt climate change, catastrophic loss of biodiversity, the unraveling of ecosystems around the world, we really begin to see how this way of thinking, these cultural attitudes that we have about these things, has a detrimental impact on our own ability to survive into the near future. Forget about the long term, the near future. So we decided that the best thing to do, considering that I had spoken with Michael previously on the podcast about policing, Michael is a former Baltimore police officer, and in 2015, I believe it was, he started to speak out against policing in the United States and how it works. And in the episode I did with him, in which I interviewed him, when we talked about policing specifically, I agree with him completely. He's not wrong at all in saying that the ways in which policing works in the United States is built on white supremacy. It has these built-in incentives and disincentives to encourage certain kinds of behavior in police officers. And in no amount of reform is going to fix that unless we really tackle the main issue, which is that police officers and police departments and law enforcement in general is really not held accountable to their actions by citizens. So anyway, when we talk about that, Michael's fine. He really gets at the point of it, and I think he's very objectively true in a lot of his research. But when we talk about environmental issues, climate change, biodiversity, ecology, all of these different subjects relating to this, Michael makes a lot of false assertions and claims, scientifically untrue claims, which he will say over and over again in this debate, that the science that I presented, that has been presented over and over again in various forms in various peer-reviewed journals and papers by reputable scientists from all around the world that have done on-the-ground research, that science is not real, that it's all conjecture, or it's not all conjecture, I should say, that it is conjecture to a great degree. It's a lot of it is based on opinion, and a lot of it is based on these individuals projecting their own biases onto their science, which that is a topic that is worth exploring. But what's going to happen is you're going to listen to this debate, you're going to watch this thing, and you're probably, I imagine, going to be extremely frustrated. You're going to find, well, what was the fucking point of any of this? My exact feeling as well. What I hoped would be an engaging and interesting conversation that would maybe illuminate certain value systems, right? Certain ideas that each of us have about what it means to be a human being in this time. What's the difference between, say, environmentalist values versus humanist values? How can we find a common ground here? So yeah, we had this really this idea that instead of hashing this shit out on Facebook or some other social media site, it may be best to actually have a real conversation about this. But see, after this 2-hour-long thing that we're going to call a debate, which it really wasn't, it's really just a big fucking train wreck, a big pile of shit, ultimately, I was trying to figure out what the fuck happened. I was baffled by what happened during this thing. I was frustrated and confused because Michael constantly interrupted me. He kept on creating these false, comparisons, choose this or this, would you rather kill this or would you rather kill that? These really weird questions that he would just put upon me. I had to answer them. I had anything to do with what we were really discussing. And again, every time I would present any scientific evidence, he would just say, nope, that's not factual, or that's conjecture. But I was trying to figure out why did this thing stink so bad? And I put the audio up on my Patreon page so people can listen and give me some feedback as to what the hell happened. And I had a friend of the podcast turned me on to something, and I wanna bring this up, because if there's anything that you could get out of this discussion, it would be the ways in which people use certain techniques in order to win. It has absolutely nothing to do with who's right. It has everything to do with psychologically manipulating your opponent. So my friend, he said, hey, I figured it out. I figured out what was so wrong with this whole thing. Michael is using a technique called the Reid technique. Now, by looking up the Reid technique just on Wikipedia, you can get a pretty basic understanding of what it is. The Reid technique is used by law enforcement, both on the federal level and all the way down to local police departments.
During an interview, we ask questions to develop investigative information. But during the interrogation now, we're going to make statements for the purpose of obtaining an admission of guilt.
It's a way for police and for law enforcement agents, officials, whoever, to get confessions out of people, whether or not they actually committed the said crime that they're being interrogated for. It's a psychologically manipulative technique to put pressure on people, to get them to, again, to admit things whether they did it or not. And I just want to give you a very quick definition here. The Reid technique is a method of questioning suspects developed by consultant and polygraph expert John Reid. Supporters argue that the Reid technique is useful in extracting information from otherwise unwilling suspects, while critics have charged the technique can elicit false confessions from innocent people, especially children. The Reid technique is a registered trademark of John E. Reid and Associates and is widely used by law enforcement agencies in North America. I really wanted to point to, out of the 9 steps of this technique, particularly number 6 and number 7. Number 6 being the suspect will become quieter and listen, move the theme of the discussion towards offering alternatives. If the suspect cries at this point, infer guilt.
In an effort to increase the suspect's feeling of internal anxiety and guilt at this stage of the interrogation, we begin to move closer, shortening the distance between the suspect and ourselves, moving into their personal space. Because now some suspects are drawing into a shell. They're withdrawing from us, they're not listening to our words, and they're beginning to think about punishment and what's going to happen to them. And we don't want their thoughts focused on punishment. So we move closer. We show understanding, sympathy, and compassion. And at the same time now, when we get the suspect's attention back to us, we begin to focus the theme down to the 1 or 2 sentences that are going to be the core of the alternative question, where we're going to give the subject basically a good and a bad reason for committing the crime. This is the question we're going to ask that gets us the first admission of guilt.
And number 7, pose the alternative question, giving 2 choices for what happened, one more socially acceptable than the other. The suspect is expected to choose the easier option, but whichever alternative the suspect chooses, guilt is admitted. As stated above, there is always a third option, which is to maintain that they did not commit the crime.
In the alternative question, we present to the suspect 2 reasons for committing the crime, a good reason and a bad reason. Whichever one he chooses, he's admitting he did it. For example, did you plan this thing out, or did it just happen on the spur of the moment? Or, in another case, was this your idea, or did your buddy talk you into it? Whichever side he picks, he's admitting he did it.
My question is, why the fuck is Michael using a law enforcement interrogation technique in a fucking debate? What does that have to do with anything? Why would he use something that is, again, used by law enforcement to get confessions out of people during what was supposed to be a debate about human nature, human beings and their relationship with the natural world, climate change, and the science behind these subjects? You don't use interrogation techniques to prove anything scientific. It doesn't make any fucking sense. So that to me, when I learned that, I was like, oh, that's why this thing felt wrong. That's why this thing felt manipulative. That's why this thing felt gross, basically. So if there's anything that you can get out of this piece of shit debate, it is that certain people like to use manipulative psychological tactics in order to win things. In their mind, of course. They want it to at least be perceived that they've won something. I found this whole thing to be rather perplexing and strange. And And really, that's probably the only thing that you are all going to get out of this. I may, put some links down below of some of the papers that I was referencing in this thing, maybe some of the things that Michael was referring to as well. And you can make your own judgments about whether these papers are scientifically accurate or not, whether the data that they present and the conclusions they have from that data is accurate or not. But I guarantee you that Michael really had no interest in actually understanding the truth of this. This to him was a competition, and that's not how I approach this at all. As I expressed to him from the very beginning, more than anything, this isn't going to be about who wins this debate, because I don't think there's going to be a winner. It's about examining our value systems, and how our value systems play a huge part in how we choose to view the world, and again, how human beings relate with the natural world. So if anything, understanding the Reid technique will help you, if you are in fact interrogated by police, to understand that you can just shut the fuck up and don't let them coerce you into giving them false information that may lead to your prosecution of some crime that you may or may not have committed.
Was it just spur of the moment, Vinny? You didn't plan it out, did you? Wasn't it just spur of the moment?
I didn't plan nothing.
That's what I thought all along. I'm glad to hear that, because that says a lot about you. That's really important. Now, where did the knife come from? Did a friend give it to you, or did you pick it up off one of the tables?
I got it from a friend.
So fuck the police, fuck the Reid technique, and particularly fuck this debate. But I'm putting it out there because I think it would be, I have nothing really to hide. So I hope that there is something valuable that you can get out of this thing. This will be my last time speaking with Michael. I have no interest in continuing our conversation, particularly after this debate. But yeah, if you have any insights into this debate and into what was brought up in this thing, please let me know what those are. I would really kind of be interested in hearing what people have to say about this. Yeah, thank you for listening to me up to this point, and here's my train wreck of a debate with Michael Wood Jr. My question, I guess. I guess my first question to you would be, how do you define what is, quote, good for human beings and humanity as a whole?
Right. So that's why I think a lot of what in the previous conversation, we were talking about why should I care about whether which animal has a right to something or doesn't have a something. That's why I think we're coming down to those philosophies, and that's why I was talking about being a humanist. Mm-hmm. And so I think the bottom line is true that most of us would agree that the moral position and what is agreed upon in society kind of like just becomes the moral position that we all have to go upon at the moment. But what I'm saying is that ultimately most of us are going to prioritize humans, and I'm a humanist, and all things that what I care about is doing things that benefit the human species most. So if that means, so basically what I'm trying to say is if there is one human being and there are 10 deer that have to die, I don't care about the deer. Screw the deer. When it comes down to it, if there's one human being and 10 dolphins, as much as I would put dolphins higher on the scale, screw the dolphins. If we need a medicine as a society, and that means that all elephants are wiped off the planet, so be it. Human beings come absolutely first to me under all circumstances. And I am a constructivist, which means I would say good is what we collectively decide, but it's always subjective. So the rules of society determine good to be the prevalent ideas of the time and in the question. And so because it's a subjective term, it must always have a point of comparison. So what I always will have to ask you is what is good for what? Because what is good for America is a separate idea than what is good for humanity or what is good for the dolphins. Sure. And without the pro-con analysis, I think the discussion is always disingenuous. So what is good will always have to be argued upon the conditions and time that it's literally occurring in at that moment, which is kind of relativist, but not.
Sure.
It's basically relative morality.
Yeah. So if say there were a mountain of data to indicate that what is seen in the short term as being good. So let's say you're talking about if all of elephants were wiped out, but human beings could get a medicine somehow. That's some kind of crazy fluke that somehow destroying the entire elephant population would lead to a medicine. But let's just use that as an example. Okay, so we have a medicine now. So if there's mountains of data showing that if we obliterate all elephants, and that there would be long-term negative implications for humanity and all other non-human life as a result, would that still be good, in your view, at least, for humanity?
If the ultimate pro-con analysis is that we're benefiting human beings, and I always mean this in the long run, I don't mean, next week. That's
Sure.
stupid.
Right.
So what is going to better our society and our position in the world? Like right now, we're at the top of the food chain, and if so, anything that keeps us at the top of the food chain, I think is good. I don't want to be a species that's not at the top of the food chain, and I don't know how else we go about that, because, like, so for instance, when you are, so I'm going to presume that you're worried about carbon emissions and the temperature rising, glacial melting, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right. So again, what you're doing is, it's not like nature will be stopped. It's the nature that you want. So if temperatures would go up, other species are going to proliferate, and they're going to come about. New ones will come to fruition. Evolution will set its course, and new species will rise. You're having like this conservative idea where you're trying to lock in a stasis, and the stasis can never be locked in. There's just too many variables. Things are constantly evolving. We often do things where we think we're going to help, but then what we do actually harms. Like we had to bring the wolves back into Yellowstone to bring back the balance with the trees and stuff like that. So because we're prioritizing nature in Yellowstone, I mean, that's what we're doing there. We're trying to set that off aside. We've determined that it's better for humanity to be able to see this and experience this area, so we're going to protect it. So that's our moral judgment at the time. But if it comes to be that we need that land, oh, sorry, we're going to use that land. And so let me ask that. So what I mean by prioritization, so what is more harmful to human life? A temperature rise or a temperature fall? You know?
Well, I think really it matters is the range in which that temperature is either rising or falling. So
yeah, I don't care. So I mean, do the same thing on a balance.
So I can't make one
so
or
the
the
most
other.
dangerous thing to humanity environmentally is an ice age. And
Yeah.
we're due for an ice age. So when even say we say carbon is going out and it's polluting the environment, right? Well, if an ice age is coming and it's creating a greenhouse effect, then we would be staving off an ice age. So pollution would be good for humanity, but it would be going against the natural flow of the earth. So what would you choose?
I guess I wouldn't want to make that choice. I don't know how to make a choice based on that. I know that the data does show that we would be due for an ice age at this point. So I understand that completely, and based on carbon emissions and the rise of global average temperatures, we have altered that course. We've altered that cyclical pattern that seems to would have happened regardless of whether human beings were here or not.
We don't know that. I would object to that.
Yeah, we can't know that for sure, but we can make projections. We can look at the past. We can see that human beings
can't.
have.
That's my argument here. So we will get into that eventually, but I just have to say that I don't think that's true in the climate sciences. I've read these documents. I've traced back the literature, and this is almost entirely opinion.
About what?
Any of it. So like I went back in the literature 30 years ago where they're making all these claims about global cooling, or they're making claims about Antarctica, which has now been cooling for the last 30 freaking years. So
Well, I would contend with that point, though. You sent me an article. I don't have it up right now, in which it talks about how there has been an increase of snow mass in Antarctica over the past however many decades. But in that very same article, it says that compared to what amount of ice is being lost, it's kind of not that it's completely inconsequential, but the overall trend is sea
But
ice
see, this is
loss.
ideal. This is ideal. And I'll put this link down at the bottom. That article that we're talking about right now, when they're talking about the ice mass that has been lost, they are making a model of their predictions of what is occurring underneath the sea that they have absolutely no measurement for. Everybody can look at the article, and this is exactly what I'm talking about that I see in the climate sciences. They'll say, well, this evidence isn't real because we made this computer model that says because we had this temperature fluctuation over here, or because we had this past opinion, that this is what is actually happening. But there's no evidence for that. It's just a prediction model that they made. So like I'll pull up another article that we have here while we get into the next thing and the next space, but this is like the way the thing is. So you'll hear the temperature that we've measured has in the pre-industrial age, it has gone up. So the industrial age has started to go up. So they're making all these algorithms and these bases based upon this uptick that's coming up at the industrial age. But it was actually in like the 1400s that the measured record was the highest carbon levels in the environment, and the temperature was the highest. Well, obviously we weren't having industrial age then, so they're not even taking the whole picture. They're only taking the slight uptick at the end. We just don't have the data in climate science to be saying this shit. We don't.
I would disagree with that.
I know, but that's why I'm going to put that article down so everybody can look at it.
Well, again, to me, it's not just one scientific field or discipline that is writing about this, that is doing research into the impacts of climate change. So this is the thing. You have biologists, you have marine biologists, you have people who are studying ocean currents, jet streams, atmospheric chemistry. You have ecologists, you have climatologists, glaciologists, you have a whole
I'm aware.
range.
I'm aware. In policing, you have correctional officers, you have cops, you have FBI agents, you have politicians, you have criminal, you have a studying of forensic sciences, you have the studying of whatever other issues involved with criminology that you want to point to, and they're all going to tell you about policing being rational choice theory, that you need to increase punishments and to do stop and frisk. I mean, just because this is the argument from popularity, a logical fallacy, just because they are agreeing in opinion, they do not have the data. And that's great that they all have this opinion. If we poll a bunch of cops about what they think we should do about crime, well, guess what they're going to say?
Yeah, but I wouldn't make the comparison between criminal justice and, say, sciences of atmospheric chemistry or ecology or any of these things. I mean, again, we're dealing with completely different dynamics, different systems. Now, yes, there may be those biases that exist within all of them because they are, again, these are constructed by human beings. So it's interesting. I mean, yes, there's definitely going to be that, and we have to be wary of the fact that we don't have all the data. We have to be wary of the fact that we do have biases. I am totally aware of that. But again, I think that there's a certain point when you're actually seeing the changes in real time, and they're happening at a rate that previously hasn't happened, at least not in human existence. The rate of change is, again,
I mean, dude,
outside the range
we don't
of what
have data in human existence. Like, I don't know what that means.
So if you take, say, ice core samples of Greenland, for instance, you can measure the fluctuations in temperature, and the same goes for Antarctica as well.
No, you can measure the temperature of the fluctuation of a local environment. It means nothing.
Global average temperatures can be measured. I'm making an assertion. I don't know. I can't back it up with a paper at this exact moment. I can't back it up with hard data. But again, scientists have
But that's the thing, is what I'm telling you is they will tell you all these papers. Everybody look at them and you look at them. They will tell you that this means you can correlate this to the global environment. But the only data they have is one local sample, for instance, with that. And I've seen this study. I've read these things. I've been through the literature. This is what I do all day long. And so I've been going through this stuff and looking at it. And I'm not finding anything that is actual data. I'm finding opinion, opinion, opinion. And so anyone listening to this, if you find actual data, show me it. Because everything that I see comes from the IPCC panel, which is a panel of scientists who are selected by politicians to be on a panel in Europe to make decisions on policy. Come on, I don't. I'm not
I
at
would,
all concerned about what
yeah,
they say.
I'm not, I don't take the IPCC very seriously as
Right.
well. Yeah.
So, and then the other stuff comes off of opinions. It's all of them saying that this must mean that. And I get that they may be right. But if you can't convince somebody who's in the literature all day long with your science, I think you got a weak case. Like everything that I write and every citation that I'll put out there, I will defend to freaking anybody. This is why I'm saying it. I understand the data. Here is the data. This is what we're talking about. And I can make a philosophical argument that involves more than my damn opinion, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what I see in all the climate science research. I'm searching, I promise. You know, I set this shit to search, and you hear in the 30s, they're saying that, 30 years ago, they're saying we're going to have 1 degree Celsius by 2020 going up every single year. Well, obviously that wasn't true. They're calling for global cooling 35 years ago. And the point is that, yeah, climate change is real. Humans affect the environment. Yes. But so the hell what? I don't understand, like, why that matters.
Because human survival is at risk as a result
Right.
of it.
So then you're putting humans above it and saying it's at risk. But literally, this is not true. Like, for instance, how much of the carbon that we've put into the environment by using electricity and all these energies, how many lives have been saved by that? How many vaccines have been discovered? How much plastic was used to rescue a soldier's life on the battlefield from a sucking chest wound? Like, how much of these things, how many syringes saved lives that are made out of the oil that we pulled out and burned? Like, we are not comparing this thing in an honest pro-con, I don't believe.
Yeah, and that's a valid point. But again, and if I could just reiterate a point regarding talking about opinions regarding this data, I think that often what happens is, say, I was just thinking about how they were able to pretty adequately determine the ways in which the Mayan Empire, the Mayan civilization was impacting not only the local climate, but they could actually measure that on a global scale. They also have been able to do that with Roman Empire. So that is a recorded human event, and they can
it's
actually,
not that way. I'm saying, of course, we affect it, but cows affect the
Right.
environment more than we do.
Well, cows affect the environment because we have a massive.
Right, but are they not natural now because we protected them?
I'm not saying they're not natural. I'm just saying that the systems are rather recent that we're using. So the ways in which we're growing or harvesting animal meat is not something that's been done for the majority of human history. Now, we've been domesticating animals for however many thousands of years. That's absolutely true. But at the scale that we're doing it now, no, that is rather recent. That is something that's probably come about in the past 100 years or less.
Yeah, but people are eating and having food now that they've never had before. Like,
Right.
There's less starvation and everything. So you're saying that this is going to harm human beings, but I see zero evidence of that.
Right. Well, I would say also, again, if you were to extrapolate into the future, the fact that we're, say, deforesting massive areas of boreal forests, of the Amazon forest, of various rainforests around the world, so we can accommodate all the feed that is needed to keep up these projects, to keep agriculture going, monoculture agriculture going, to feed various cattle and things like that, to meet the demand for people. Yes, they have food. Yeah, that's definitely true. But again, the cost is so massive that it's going to have long-term implications for
The cost
not
of who?
for everybody. I mean, again,
But that's the thing,
if this
is that
if
all
this
the cost is fear-mongering. There's been no cost.
I don't agree, and especially if you talk to
But what's the cost? You got to tell me that.
the indigenous
What's
people
the
of the
cost?
Amazon forest, for instance, are experiencing the cost of having the Amazon forest ripped apart. You have the indigenous people of Borneo, of various other parts of the world that are
It
impacted
doesn't.
by that.
That doesn't matter, though. I mean, you're
Why
talking
doesn't
about
it
human
matter, though?
because that's human activity.
Well,
That's
you're
like saying, hold on. That's like saying there's something wrong about the leopard species encroaching on the cheetah's prey. There's not.
again, those aren't
But this is
comparable
how every
things.
single species got here. Do you understand that every single species you're trying to protect got to where they are because they destroyed other species?
No, I don't think that that's the case at all. I
Name
don't think.
one. Name one.
Well, no, I'm not going to do that.
Name one species that got to where they
okay.
are without eating or
So
destroying
you're
other
telling me
life.
that what say a cheetah, for its, I don't know, some example, the reason that they exist is because they exerted so much force over other beings on this planet that they not only caused a mass extinction event, but they displaced massive amounts of the other populations on the planet as a result of their economic projects. That is not
Absolutely. Go look at the pigs in Hawaii.
the point that I'm ultimately making is, again, the way that human beings behave and act is
Snake
not.
fishes in the rivers. I mean, I can sit here and just keep coming up with invasive species that destroy ecology and destroy life.
And again, you could talk to an ecologist. There's some interesting literature on whether species are truly invasive or not. And again, I'm not going to argue that point at all. And of course, species.
I would argue they're not. This is exactly what I'm saying.
Species
so
come
use
into
them.
certain territory. Absolutely, yeah. And this, I think, requires a great deal of nuance in thinking about how human beings.
But it
impact
doesn't,
their
because all
environments.
I'm trying to ask you is what species is more important? And you are saying that either that we're so special that for some reason it makes us inferior to all the other species?
No, I don't think so. Again, this is a product of systems, and yes, human beings are special in a very particular kind of way. We're a very
How?
clever species. We develop massive global economic systems. We developed systems that direct human behavior on a massive
why
scale.
is that better than the trade system that tree roots have with one another?
Well, I guess I would say that
That's way more fucking amazing.
it is amazing, but again, they don't have that detrimental impact that I was just discussing.
They don't have that detrimental impact because you're not a nitrogen particle.
Yeah, I don't know how to really articulate it anymore. I guess there's just fundamental differences between how trees operate and work with it. We work with each other in the way the mycelium interacts with trees.
No,
And
but
yes,
that
certain
tree is
species.
destroying other creatures. Things must die for that tree to live. Is this an argument? Are you
No,
not conceding that point?
I'm not saying that. Obviously, other animals or other beings eat other things.
Right. So
That's very
why is
obvious.
us saying that to another species different? It's not an issue of needing a scientist.
Look, I think the underlying operating system, if I could use some sort of technological framing for this, for human beings is to survive. It is to eat. It is to continue to exist on this planet. Absolutely. We all have the same underlying instincts. We have
How
the
is
same
that different than
underlying.
any other species?
It isn't. It isn't different. But again, human beings are malleable. We're plastic. We're adaptable to various, not only ecological environments, different environmental places. I mean, obviously, people living in a completely different environment than our own is able to survive and thrive. But again, human beings develop systems that are
Right.
abstracted.
But Patrick, that's after we started doing this stuff. So, for instance, we didn't take over the world until there was a formulation, a unity, an alliance was created. And that alliance was us and wolves. That put us as the alpha species.
Sure.
Right? So was that an unnatural alliance?
I wouldn't call that unnatural. I wouldn't use that term. No.
But that's what's set in motion. So it's not that humans rule the world. It's actually that humans and wolves rule the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we're a team. We're actually one.
Sure.
And
it's a symbiotic relationship, yeah.
Right. A deeply symbiotic relationship.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So we wouldn't be in power without wolves. And wolves wouldn't be in power without us.
Probably, yeah.
So how is anything that we're doing, because we got to the top by a natural situation, I just like, what
again,
makes another species better?
I'm not trying to argue whether something is natural or unnatural. My argument is saying that the system, again, I'm just going to reiterate this point again.
If you are saying that we shouldn't do our natural programming, you're literally arguing to denaturalize us.
So again, I'm not saying that this is natural or unnatural programming. Obviously, this is what we're doing right now on this planet. What we're doing right now is totally, absolutely, obviously within the spectrum of human behavior and possibility, and we're doing it. Now, I'm not arguing that that's not the case. That is absolutely possible. But again, if we could observe other human cultures, other ways of being, we can then see and compare and say, okay, so these people have been able to exist and thrive within their various geographical locations for thousands and thousands of years without being a detrimental and overbearing organism in that space. And if they're able to find that
I don't know what that
ecological niche,
means. You have to establish that. And I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but you keep moving on with things you're not establishing.
well, what do you want me to establish exactly?
I want you to establish what is good. What is that? You're saying they're not detrimental. How are they not detrimental? I don't understand. They're killing other species and surviving off the land and species just like anybody else. So your
Okay.
opinion about what level of destruction is what you're saying. So why, if it's your opinion, and you hold an
let's make
opinion,
a very
why?
like a very obvious comparison. You've got Native American populations living in what would the Midwest, the prairies, basically, right? They revered the buffalo to a great degree. They had a lot of respect for the buffalo to a certain degree, from what I understand. These particular cultures that existed within this area. And they knew they relied on the buffalo. They had to kill the buffalo in order to live. Then they used every part of the buffalo. There was this whole process, right? Now, when Americans, quote, Americans, colonizers come in, and their immediate action was to not only obliterate the indigenous populations, but then to basically obliterate almost all of the buffalo populations as well. Now, those are completely different cultures with completely different cultural value systems. And so their operation and the way that they operate within a particular landscape is going to be completely different. Now, I would ask people, what do you prefer? Do you prefer a culture, a value system which understands its role within the broader ecology, the broader life systems of that particular area in which they are in, and they incorporate that
They
into
didn't know shit. I don't understand that.
They did on some level, because obviously they lived there for a very long time.
They didn't know that there were the planet was a goddamn circle and there was other people coming.
Yeah, of course.
So how could they possibly understand where they fit in the environment when in 2019 we don't understand where we fit in the environment?
I don't know what to say except that they were able to manage to live in a very I would say good way, beautiful way for a very long period of time without being overbearing on other living beings in that particular area. And again, once another culture moved in and took over, that completely changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an awfully whitewashed history of
probably. I'm probably
Americans.
really like missing a massive amount of details in that story. But my main point that I'm trying to get to is that
I
when
mean,
we look at
literally, I'm
human
just letting
behavior,
you know, the Native Americans hunted the buffaloes out of extinction, not white people. I mean, it's just like, I don't know where to go with that.
Okay, well, from my understanding of that particular moment in human history, no, from what I understand, Americans were basically slaughtering buffalo by the millions.
Yeah, I mean, they did, but they didn't. They're not the ones that drove them out. It was out in the prairies after the Native Americans got pushed across. But that's a different. We don't need to get into that. But that's still the point of you saying that the buffalo is more valuable and more natural than the cow. And I don't understand why you're saying that. I don't understand why you think that 1,000 buffalo lives are more valuable than 3,000 cow lives, because if you're talking about how they're harvested, that's an entirely different argument.
I'm not saying that one is more valuable than the other. I'm just saying that the way in which human beings harness the lives of other beings is what's important here. So if human beings are using
Sure, but that doesn't have
species,
anything to do with borders and stuff like that. That's what I'm saying. So you can mitigate those things. So that's what I'm saying. Your argument then is about the moral treatment of animals, but you're already going to win that argument. People, like, everyone's against factory farming. It's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing it out of, like, greed and not seeing it and things like that. And we could argue to change our lives, and I would be along with you on that journey. But to think that a buffalo lives matter more than a cow, which is, I know it's not what you're saying, but it's the implied logic of your position, is you're ranking these lives based upon, like, just your opinion. And I mean, it's great, like, you're obviously entitled to your opinion,
mm-hmm.
but we should be trying to change. If that's your opinion, that these animals should be treated better, then I would just think that a more, like, practical argument would be thrown out in front of you instead of trying to think that the past was better. I mean, the past was just never better. It's like, I don't want to go to any period in the past. I don't know.
Yeah, again, it's I
Because
hope
like
I'm
they were
not.
harmlessly, sorry, they were harmlessly, but they were dying at 40. You know, like I'm sorry, I don't want to be a part of that.
Well, you know, I know that you've spoken with Chris Ryan, who's the author of Sex at Dawn, has his own
Right.
podcast, tangentially speaking. He brings up that point you just made about, you know, people dying at 40 or whatever. That again, that's another statistic that is the
Yeah,
average
because
lifespan.
most are birth deaths.
Yeah, right. So most people actually live to probably as old as most people live now, probably in their 60s, 70s, or 80s. So again, we're adding value to whether the past is better than the present, and I
No,
do that
because
just as
you're
much as
actually
anyone.
like I would still argue like that's not because they died young in the context of our argument doesn't matter because that's you having your children dying because there's not the Western civilization there. I mean, it doesn't change the argument.
Okay.
These discussions are a deeply personal thing for many of us. There is no media support for science and the pursuit of knowledge. Throughout history, power desires a non-critical populace. I'm not begging for money, but I am pleading that you discuss these issues with the people around you, encourage them to share and subscribe. I'm viewing this work as an attempt to collect information from when people are ready to consume it. That makes this a team effort in the end. The more people that participate, the better discussions we get and the better our outcomes become. I will do my part. You?
Generally dry day on Wednesday with sunny periods. However, there may be more cloud in the southeast where it will be breezier. After a chilly start, it will be mostly dry on Thursday with some sunny spells. However, it may be rather cloudy in the southeast. Patchy rain will arrive in the north.